Today I have a special presentation for you guys. I am here with Doug Monroe. Doug has been my client now for about 8 months. And when I first met Doug last year in June, Doug had recently gone through a very difficult relapse after making some progress with his tinnitus and hyperacusis following an injury, and had basically ended up feeling like he was back at square one and reached out for some help. And we began working together at that point. And now here we are 8 months later, and Doug's life has been completely transformed. And I wanted to get his story out and for you guys to meet Doug because his story Doug has been struggling with hyperacusis first and foremost, tinnitus too, but hyperacusis at a level that I think a lot of people out there who have experienced hyperacusis in this way feel very hopeless. When you get to a point of sound sensitivity where you can barely tolerate anything, it starts to feel like you're a prisoner in your own home. And when I first met Doug, it was very much in that situation. But here we are 8 months later, and Doug has flown on airplanes, gone on road trips and driven long distances, gone to Chuck E. Cheese with his grandkids, gone to the movies again. So it's been quite a remarkable transformation and journey of healing for severe hyperacusis and tinnitus. And so I wanted to bring Doug in and introduce him to you guys and talk a little bit more about what his journey was like. So Doug, it's good to be here with you today. Why don't we start out by kind of giving us a little bit about you and your background and how this all began for you initially?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Glenn. It's a pleasure. Um, I just want to start out saying it came out of nowhere. The severe tinnitus, hyperacusis. I just woke up one morning, an hour later, I was on my knees. It was so bad.
Yeah.
It was a battle. You go to a very dark place when your tinnitus is so severe, and you go to a very dark place. And I guess I wanted to do this with Glenn to show people that there is hope, and if you keep trying, you will get better. I never thought I would be a year ago where I'm at right now. I never dreamed that I would be. I thought my life was basically over. But I got working with Glenn, and slowly, a little at a time, I started reclaiming my life again. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes work and it takes time, but it's come, and I'm almost doing everything that I was doing before. Nothing's
Yeah,
much
it's
different.
it's really amazing. Let's go through your. I think it'd be helpful to go through some of the details of your story and journey. I know you worked in a factory for 40 years and were
Yes.
around a lot of loud noise. Although I know your hearing wasn't. You didn't have any significant hearing loss despite this, but a background of a lot of loud noise exposure, which I think is probably common for some people with hyperacusis. And this onset where it suddenly knocks you back all the way, where like right from the start, everything just goes crazy is very common. Not everyone starts in such an extreme way, but so many people do, where it's just 1 second everything's fine, and the next it's like quality of life is just completely turned upside down. I remember you told me early on that like that first week you went almost a week with virtually no sleep, where just
Oh,
things just get deteriorating more and more every day. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the early journey? So I know there was some doctor's appointments and things along the way. I know you saw a couple ENTs, and you had started trying some different things as well, like some different exposure therapy and sound therapy strategies that started to help to a degree up
yeah.
until this point where you had this relapse. But so I think it'd be helpful for people to just kind of walk us through a little bit of what it was like trying to get help initially in that phase when things were really desperate and difficult.
Yeah, when things are at that worst, you don't really know what to do. You reach out to doctors, local doctors, but nobody really. I had one doctor said hyperacusis. What, he scratched his head. What's that? So around here anyway, nobody really know anything about it. And I didn't know anybody that had tinnitus, this severe or anything. Even my doctor didn't. So it must have been a very unusual thing. So there was really nobody at that time to reach out to talk out to, and you're very alone and isolated. And people around you started thinking, well, maybe he's getting a little, maybe he's
Yeah.
making this all up. Maybe he has a mental
It's hard for
condition.
people to understand what you're going
Yes,
through, like when you
exactly.
can't see it.
As I put myself in their shoes, I'd probably be the same way. I wouldn't understand it either if you didn't. if you didn't
Yeah.
experience it.
Especially when it just comes out of the blue. Like one day you're fine, and then the next second it's like
Yes, because like I
quality of
said, I
life
worked
is
in
in
a shop for
shambles.
40 years and it was a noisy environment, but I was retired for like 3 years when this came
Yeah.
on. So I
Right.
wasn't around them severe noises. And I think a
Okay.
couple of weeks before it hit me, I would hear a real faint ringing, like way back in the back of my head, but it was real nothing, I didn't really think anything of it.
Sure. Sure.
Then one
Until
day,
that moment where it all came in full
yes,
force.
it just floored me. Yes.
Now, I know too, your hyperacusis didn't start right away. Like I know this started with tinnitus, and I think you told me, if I remember correctly, early on, you were at Chuck E. Cheese with your
Yes.
grandkids, and you suddenly noticed that this is way too loud. And
Yeah.
then leaving that environment, you realize like, oh, maybe I'm sensitive to sound, and that was the sort of beginning of what became an even more challenging journey of the onset of hyperacusis. So do you remember that time, like when you
Oh,
first realized that?
yes, absolutely. Yes. I hadn't seen the grandkids in a few weeks when this all started. I hadn't seen anybody. And finally, I told them, okay, we're going to go. I'm going to take you kids out to Chuck E. Cheese. And my head was still throbbing, but I wanted to do something with them because I haven't seen them. And as soon as I walked in the door, I was just floored by the noise. It was just excruciating loud. I
Yeah,
walked in, I got my headphones, my muffs, and I put those on. I put earplugs in because it was so loud.
yeah.
That's when I realized I was having more of an issue than just tinnitus.
Yeah, and I know it built from there too. Like that
Yes,
was just like the first experience.
yes,
I remember you telling me that. I think you told me that when you realized this and it started deteriorating your sound tolerance and the tinnitus was getting worse, that you were starting to have panic attacks around people. And then I
absolutely.
think you said you stayed in your house for 5 months. Is that
I
correct?
I couldn't be around anybody but my wife. If anybody was around, a little baby could walk in the door. I'd be scared to death. I would
Ugh,
just pace nonstop
yeah.
from one room to the next and sit down for maybe 2 minutes, and I'd have to get back up. And like I say, there was no sleeping till finally a doctor gave me a medication that would help me to sleep. That helped
Yeah,
to
and
change things. But it was months. I think it was
sure.
5 months before I went out.
Wow. That's it's a long time to feel completely trapped in your
Yes,
house. And so I know you get this medication, you start sleeping a little bit better,
a little bit.
which helped, of course. Like being so sleep deprived is going to just put your system into such a more elevated state of stress and activation, worsen all of these different problems. And you start working with some other people doing some different things like just some slow just basic exposure therapy to sound,
Yes,
some sound therapy. I know you didn't have a good experience with hearing aids. I know hearing aids can be helpful in cases for hyperacusis, but some people seem to react very poorly to them. And in my experience, if you don't have any significant hearing loss, hearing aids are not necessarily an important tool in the hyperacusis desensitization process, at least not with the type of program and protocol that I teach. So I know you had a bad experience there, but you were starting to feel better to some degree. I know that it wasn't you didn't improve completely, but I think you were going out a little bit again, starting to do things
yes.
again
I
until
was
all of
just
a sudden, as often happens to people, and this is something I talk about a lot, this idea of how important it is to have a long-term strategy because life is crazy sometimes. And, you know, sometimes random injuries and incidents happen that affect our ears, affect our health. So why don't you pick up the story again where you have this eye injury and kind of what the fallout was from that and what you went through there?
sure. After this happened, after about 5 months, I started feeling slightly better. Not a whole lot better, but a little better where we were starting to do a little bit. I was starting to go into the car with plugs for short distances. And I felt like I was getting, a little bit better. And one night I was getting ready to go to bed and I had all these lights flickered in one of my eye and my eye pretty much went blind. So I thought, wow,
So
maybe I
scary.
haven't slept much the last few months. So I thought maybe it was something we'll see tomorrow. So I went to sleep, woke up the next day, and I'm basically blind. So of course that gets the panic going again.
Oh yeah.
So by the time I find a doctor and he says, "Oh, you have a retina detachment. It
Ooh.
could lead to blindness, but we get you in as quick as we can." But between the surgery, between all that drama, it seems like what little I had gained crashed right back down.
Yeah. And it's such a hard place to be when that happens, when you have sort of like a habituation relapse, because it's like you remember how bad it was before. You remember also that it got better and how hard it was to get to that point. And then that's all been taken away from you. It's like the rug was pulled out from under
Yes.
your feet. So it's like it's in some ways having a relapse like that, even though you hadn't gotten to where you wanted to be. I mean, you would have given anything to get back to that little bit of progress you had made. In a lot of times the relapse is a lot more challenging psychologically and emotionally than the initial onset, right? Because it's like, oh God, the nightmares starting all over again. And
Yes.
now you're dealing with the recovery of like a major injury and surgery to boot, right? Where now you're not able to see, other senses are affected, right? So it's your nervous system is just heightened again into this like massive state of fight or flight and anxiety. And that's when through in the backdrop of all that stress is when we first met. Um, I think I think if I look here in my notes, when we met, I think it was about a month after that, like 1 month in,
Yes.
and you were basically back to square one. I think at that point you were able to tolerate the TV with like a tiny bit of volume, but
Yes.
music was very difficult. Phone calls were difficult. You weren't going
Yes.
out again. You weren't seeing anybody really
Yes.
going to stores, driving. All of that was very difficult, and I know because
Yes.
we had to work through all of that together.
Yes.
In working together. So when we first started, it was sort of like a scary and difficult place, right? It's like this feeling of like, oh God, I don't know if I can do it again. Like it's hard to even. It wasn't even the relief you wanted, the first time, and it had taken
Right.
so long to even get that little bit of improvement. Um, and so we had our first session, and I remember like in that first session you had to go back and forth between one click of volume on your iPad and no clicks of volume with
Yes.
captions. And I think if I remember correctly, we had to break it up. I don't think we did the one long session. I think we broke it up into smaller parts because that was all you could tolerate at that point.
Yeah. And you could
um
see that how much it was bothering me. So yeah,
oh
they
yeah.
recommended us doing that.
Yeah, and that's something like over the last few years, I feel like I've really dialed in the protocol for helping people with hyperacusis and other sound tolerance conditions, and your success story is certainly a good example of this. But one thing I realized a long time ago is like everybody's at a different place, and I'm willing to always be flexible and just make it comfortable, right? If we need to, however, we need to accommodate, I need to accommodate a person so that they feel comfortable talking, and we can at least have the information exchange. I mean, I've worked with people who are deaf. Captions work now. It's like a good thing about AI is like real time live captioning in Zoom is doable now. So you can turn the volume off and still communicate effectively, which is nice. So when we first got work started, it might be helpful to like pause here and just sort of have just explain a little bit of like the approach that we took and kind of like the strategy that we used to help you. So in a case like yours, Doug, where the sound tolerance has become so severely low, where any amount of volume of any sound is difficult, right? It's not, I know there
Go
were
ahead.
certain types of noises that were especially difficult, but all sound was difficult at volumes that were quiet, right? Volumes that now would have been, it's hard to even imagine that you had a hard time with
Absolutely.
it back
Yes.
then, right? So what here at Rewiring Tinnitus, what I teach and what Doug and I did together is a hyperacusis desensitization process that involves meditation. It's sort of like a spin on the classic exposure therapy model, which is often used for hyperacusis. And if you think about it, hyperacusis and tinnitus is a lot like a phobia in the sense that you're having this very severe nervous system activation, fight or flight response in reaction to some ostensibly harmless stimulus, right? In the case of a phobia, like if you're afraid of heights, there's just this overwhelming fear and panic in presence of heights. And for a long time, the way to heal a phobia has been exposure therapy. You gradual graded exposure therapy. You slowly introduce more of the thing that the person is afraid of, and their nervous system acclimates, and it gets easier and easier to tolerate gradually over time. And there's something to be said about that for hyperacusis and tinnitus exposure as well. But we utilized a meditation program where I had you using tinnitus meditation techniques, which is what I've talked about, what I write about in my book, and behind the work I do here at Rewiring Tinnitus, where I have people focus on their tinnitus because you were struggling with tinnitus quite severely as well, as the object of meditation. So rather than focusing on the breath, focusing on a mantra or a part of the body, you focus on the tinnitus. But because you're doing this mental exercise of meditation, which is just inherently very relaxing, regardless of what you're focusing on, even though the tinnitus is a much more scary, imposing kind of thing to focus on, you can focus on it in meditation and still achieve this sort of relaxed state of meditation. And in doing so, it's sort of like a relaxation enhanced exposure therapy, where you're not just doing exposure therapy, but you're working to create like a positive association with the sound of the tinnitus, because just by doing these repetitions of meditation every day where you're focusing on the tinnitus and feeling very relaxed and kind of sending this signal to the nervous system of like, you see how relaxed we feel? You see how we got here? We were focusing on that sound that we normally hate to get here. Try to remember that. Like sometimes it's relaxing, right? So it's not so much about just decreasing the negative response, but creating a positive response. And in my experience, this helps to facilitate habituation in a much more direct and I think faster way. I think it leverages neuroplasticity in a more powerful way as well. This addition of this positive reinforcement element. And so we started with tinnitus meditation, but the challenge with someone with hyperacusis is that it's very difficult to tolerate any kind of noise, right? And I often will use varying types of sound and sound technologies as a way to mask some of the tinnitus, cover some of the tinnitus when you meditate, and to help you relax so it's not so difficult. But when I'm working with someone like you, Doug, those soundscapes become very difficult. So the first step was just finding the meditation options that worked best. And the one kind of interesting thing that I found in working with many hyperacusis patients is that even in cases like yours, Doug, where it was so severe, there's always at least one sound or some kind of sound that the person can tolerate to some extent. I remember for you, if I remember correctly, it was like babbling brook was a sort of okay
Yes.
sound. And as long as there's one kind of sound that you can tolerate at a very low volume, it's enough to get started. So what I had you do, what I have many people do, is we find the meditation option that's tolerable, and that's a process of experimenting and trying different things. But we start at the level where you feel completely comfortable, so you can start to get a little bit of an impact on the tinnitus, learn these techniques in a more comfortable way. But then once you get comfortable, we utilized a process where to raise your volume tolerance, we would increase the volume of the background noise during meditation to a point where it was about 10% uncomfortable, like right on the edge of discomfort. And you would meditate at that exact level for a couple days. But I remember for you, it was like every 3 or 4 days of doing that or so, all of a sudden it was comfortable again. And so that was like our starting point. We figured out the most comfortable sound, and we started to just in increments work up the sound tolerance to those very comfortable sounds, which serve to raise sound tolerance to some degree across the board. So I'm curious what you remember of those initial experiences. I know you took to this quite fast. I was looking back through my notes today
It
that in
was
that right
shocking.
away.
It
Yeah.
was
So why don't you
shocking.
talk a little bit about those early experiences with the meditation?
I would run in. I was so shocked by how fast it was too. I would run in and tell my wife, I can listen to a song. I can listen to a song. Or I can talk to Glenn. I can have the sound on. It was huge ordeals. It was such excitement. I made huge gains early on. And that was so enlightening for that to happen. And that's
Yeah.
what gives you the strength to keep motoring on, because you see, wow, I
Yeah. The
did this, I can do
motivation.
more. Yes. It gives you the
Yeah.
motivation to keep going more.
Totally.
Yes, it was the best move that I made when I met
So I,
Glenn. He helped me.
yeah. I appreciate you saying that. No, you did take to this very quickly. Sometimes when I'm working with people who have as severe hyperacusis as you did, it takes a lot more experimenting. I think we were able to figure that out and get the right meditation audio figured out almost immediately. And so it was really great to see that it's like almost immediately it was apparent, like, okay, something is different with this. Like I am improving in a much faster
Absolutely.
way than I did last time, in a much more direct way. And so it gave you motivation, but pretty quick, even as things are improving, you suddenly realize, like, oh, it's like, the mountain is still so much bigger now, right? So
Yes,
it's like, now you can tolerate everyday sounds in your home, but driving is still difficult. You're not seeing the grandkids or the family members. Stores can be difficult, right?
very
Not
yes.
going to the movies, not quality of life, still very far from the quality of life where what left you like in this initial onset, right? But enough motivation to feel, oh, this is something's working here. Like
Yeah.
clearly I'm on the right path. And so as the weeks went on and the months went on, once, I remember we worked through a variety of different types of very comfortable, soothing sounds in meditation. And then we began to incorporate more challenging sounds. And one of the things that I have for my clients here is like a giant, um, like repository that I've collected over the months and years of like difficult hyperacusis soundscapes. And what's funny about that is, whatever soundscapes you hated the most, be it like vacuums or kids yelling and screaming, it's like someone out there likes those noises so much they made a 10-hour version on YouTube. So I have, this gigantic library of difficult soundscapes and ambiances. And so, our first goal was, all right, well, the grandson's birthday's coming up. They're having a party at Chuck E. Cheese. I want to be able to go, right? And so we started with, soundscapes that involve like kids yelling and screaming on a playground, right? Like so do you remember when we first did that?
Yes, absolutely. I do remember.
And it's funny because like I put, you play these soundscapes for people or they listen to them and they think, oh God, like there's no way I'm possibly able to relax with this. Like it's so like you're just right on the edge of feeling completely overwhelmed. But that's the nice thing about using soundscapes is you can do it in a very controlled way. Like even if one click of volume is too much for you, you can move the speaker farther away until it's not, right? So like there's a
Yes.
way to get like even lower volume levels. And so we started there. We worked through a variety of these types of soundscapes. And lo and behold, the first big milestone was you were able to go to that birthday party at Chuck
Yes.
E. Cheese.
Lots of ear protection, and I was in shock when I was sitting in there and
I
it was
remember
going
talking
on.
about this when you
And
came out of
one
that.
thing too is, Glenn, I probably didn't write it down, but I couldn't take a shower or nothing. I was just taking sponge baths. So I talked to
That's
Glenn.
right.
I said, Glenn, it's been like 6 months since I've been able to take a shower. So he worked on that stuff with me, the sounds, and just do a little bit at a time and a few minutes at a time. And in no time, I'm taking regular showers. And I was
Yeah.
just blown away, how quick
Yeah.
it was.
And the nice thing, so to add to that too, I do remember that now. And one thing that's helpful to understand too is because when people hear me talk about this, like or hear us talk about this, like how we had to work through all these different, one by one, we're working through all these sounds that are difficult for you and triggering. Um, is that there is a lot of overlap between different sounds. So like once you desensitize to the sound of a shower, well, the sound of a faucet becomes a lot easier, right? You live in Pennsylvania where you get a lot of snow, and I remember, you have to run the snowblower at times, right? And it's like we worked on that sound, but once you desensitize to the snowblower, well, now you've made some progress with lawnmower noise, with vacuum noise, because it's all like there's a lot of overlap with the frequencies. So I don't want people to get the wrong idea that it's you got to if there's 100 sounds that you got to desensitized to 100 sounds. It's not like that. It's maybe 10 sounds will get you those
Right.
100, get you to, where everything across the board just lifts. So we were systematically over time just working through all these different soundscapes one by one. You would come back to me, like I'm doing great with that. And so at a certain point, it became time to try to get you out in the world again, get you living again. And a big part of that, I think it'd be helpful to talk about this a little bit, is just how we approached getting you comfortable with driving again, getting you
Yes.
comfortable with going to Target and Walmart and grocery stores. How we got you in all the sort of like environmental environments that were difficult, which were more unpredictable to some degree, right? There aren't going to be like driving, for example, is something that you can simulate it to some degree and during meditation. And I think we even started by having you just meditate in the car with it just
Yes.
idling in the driveway, which
Yes.
is just
That's
a
where we
starting
started.
point.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you have to start driving. And so one thing that can be very helpful is using musicians' earplugs, which lower the decibel intensity of sound, but do so in a way where sound is still coming through. Like it's not just trying to block everything, it's just lowering the decibel levels and it's trying of all the different frequencies and it's trying to do that as evenly rather as possible so that you're hearing everything, you're actually getting the sound exposure just at a lower decibel level. And by using various levels of sound reduction and progressively lowering the level of sound reduction over time, we got you out into more and more environments. First, comfortable with whatever level of protection we needed, but then progressively over time to lower and lower levels of protection. And then oftentimes to the degree where you didn't need any protection in a lot of these
Yes.
environments. So, why don't you talk a little bit about that, the kind of earplugs you used, and sort of what that was like, you doing this sort of like gradual exposure therapy in the real world?
Yes. Well, prior to that, I couldn't ride into a car, just a very short, and I'd have to have muffs and everything on. I couldn't drive. My wife would drive, just very short distances. And Glenn had me first. I have to get used to the car engine noise. So he have me just idle the car. I had, they were called 1, 2, 3 plugs. I think they were like a loop plug, but they were called 3, 2, 1 plugs or 1, 2, 3, where you can adjust three being the strongest level to
It's the loop
two into
switch,
one.
is what they're called. The loop switch. I
Switch,
think
yeah,
they're on the
loop
loop
switch.
switch too. It's musicians' earplugs that have a little dial on the side where you can switch between three different levels of sound reduction, which is
Yeah,
perfect for this sort of like gradual, systematic approach to desensitization because you can always
yes,
start with full plugs, progress to level three, to level two, to level one, to nothing. So it gives you like a very easy way to do that on the fly.
right. And yeah, yeah, that was very handy. And so I started in the driveway. I would just start the car and I'd have my loop plugs all the way as strong as they go. And he said, do that day after day, a few minutes at a time, work at 5 minutes, then go to 10 minutes. You're comfortable, go to 15 minutes. And once you get there, you switch your plugs from a 3 to a 2. Do the same thing over again. And we went 5 minutes, 10 minutes, so often down to
Yep.
one. And then it was down to driving. And driving would go like same thing. I had on set 3, trying to go
Local
15,
roads first,
20,
of course.
25. Yep, short distances real first till it got comfortable. Then I'd go a little bit more and a little bit more. Then over time, we would lower the plug down to another level and
Progress to
start all
highway
over
driving.
again. Yes, and it went down to a 1. And then once I got comfortable driving 20 minutes on a number 1, then we went to no plugs, start driving just a few minutes, then add on. Nothing was done overnight. Everything was slowly done a little bit at a time. So not to cause
Yes.
any problems with anything.
Yeah, utilizing all kinds of techniques and tools to help you manage things along the way. Now, we've been talking a lot about the hyperacusis. What we haven't really been talking about too much is how the tinnitus factored into all this, because the tinnitus is what started this whole thing. And when we first met, I don't know which was worse. In my opinion, it seemed like the hyperacusis was probably the more severe problem, but the tinnitus was also very much a constant presence and really
Yes.
affecting quality of life. And so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about, one thing, something you experience that so many people experience when you're dealing with both problems, which is as you're working a program like this, where you're constantly pushing the boundary out further and further and further in this sort of systematic way, you because you're always sort of on the edge of what you can tolerate, it still keeps your nervous system is sort of kind of at this, it's not activated, but it's a close to activated state. And a lot of times the tinnitus would spike and flare up as well. So I know
Absolutely.
like early on that was quite challenging for you, like dealing
Yes.
with these tinnitus spikes. But that over time, because we were using tinnitus focused meditation as the meditation for the hyperacusis desensitization work, you were also habituating to tinnitus. So even though you were getting a lot of these fluctuations and spikes, as the months went on, they became much easier to tolerate and easier to
Yes.
handle, and then ultimately less, right? So it might be how, maybe speak a little bit to that, like what the tinnitus was like along the way and how your ability to cope and tolerate and live with tinnitus changed as you went through this process.
Yes, absolutely. Tinnitus did. I had spiking problems through the whole process.
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
guess the biggest thing, though, I learned more about me and my tinnitus as time went on. I knew how far, after a while, how far to take it. I knew not to do multiple things in one day because for me, it would spike it. So you kind of
Yes.
learn about yourself and what your own range is after a while. But
Yeah.
early on, you didn't know that. And yeah, it would have a lot of spikes, but Glenn would say just, hey, it's part of the process. It'll get better over time.
Yes.
And it did. It slowly
Yes.
got better. And just make sure everybody knows that none of this stuff happened overnight or in a week or two. This was
Yeah.
months of real slow progression.
Yeah. What I would argue that you got to a pretty good place with tinnitus probably in the first like 3 to 4 months, I would
It
say,
was, yeah,
which is pretty
huge
which is
change.
average for me. Like what I see with people that I work with for tinnitus habituation. But when you're dealing with such severe sound sensitivity on top of this, where there's just so much work to do to open quality of life back up to what it was before, that process is always going to take longer. But I would argue too that like I think that like we talked about that initial milestone where you were able to go to Chuck E. Cheese's, like Chuck E. Cheese with your grandkids. That happened, I think, that was probably like 4 or 5 months in, right? So like
Yes.
you were seeing pretty significant improvement at that time. So while it is gradual, it's helpful to point out that it's not like you had to wait 8 months and then finally you woke up one day, then everything was different.
Oh,
You
yeah.
were experiencing like
Yeah.
milestone after milestone and like
Yes.
the big wins along the way that
Yeah,
just kept you
especially in the
motivated.
beginning. The wins were just huge in the beginning. I was even shocked how fast early on things moved along really
Yeah.
good. Like to
Yeah.
give an example is I was a type I always loved thunderstorms, thunder, lightning, rain.
Sure.
But when my hyperacusis was at its worst, when a storm would go through, I'd curl up into a ball. I was scared to death. My central nervous system was so messed up. But
Yeah.
after 4 or 5 months, that was all kind of going away. I'm starting to love thunderstorms again. I'm heavy rain. That's how I go to
Yeah.
sleep at night every night now.
Yeah. And it also too, like I was just looking back thinking about milestones. The first really big milestone was the biggest milestone, I think, that you experienced the whole time we were working together is this big, extended family trip to Disney World. So I don't think you
Yeah.
had taken a flight in quite a long time.
Yes.
And that happened at about 5.5 months in, five, or maybe like six, seven, somewhere around 6 months in. You had
Yes.
so it wasn't like 8 months to by 6 months you had recovered enough that you were
Yes.
able to do multiple flights and spend time in Disney World, which is not a
Yes.
quiet place.
No, yeah, it was it went way better than I even thought it was. I told Glenn, I think a couple of months ahead of time what was going on. So he started preparing me for these different noises, the sound of the cabin inside the airplane. We worked on sounds for that. Different lots of people talking and lots of stuff going on. So we listened to soundscapes for that too. And by the
Yeah.
time it came time to go, we went back and forth on the plane. I used hearing protection, of course, but it all went perfect. I had no problems with anything at all.
Was
I
your
was
family
shocked.
surprised?
Yeah, everybody was surprised. Yes, yes. Matter of
That's
fact, we're
great.
going again in a couple of weeks, just me and the wife. We're going to go down and we're going to even do more than we did last time.
You're going back to Disney?
Yeah, me
Oh,
and the wife are going down for a couple of
well,
weeks.
I'll be down there in a couple weeks too, actually. So maybe we'll
Oh,
be there at the
geez.
same time.
Yeah, would that be something, huh?
We'll have to talk.
Absolutely.
Well, amazing. Um, so I think just to wrap up here, it just kind of might be good to just describe like where you're at now, and I'm happy to hear that you have more travel planned. I think you told me you got some big road trips planned as
Yes,
well.
yeah, lots.
Talk about what life is like now, and kind of what the future holds, and what comes next.
Well, I'm happy to say my life is back. Me and the wife are back doing things that we planned on before all this happened. I never
That's
dreamed a
wonderful.
year ago that this would be where I'm at right now. I would have never have guessed to come this far. And we're just living our life normally now, making the plans we
Amazing.
normally would make. Everything is all coming back to normal. The sounds I'm still working on sounds, but it's the highest sounds
Movie
like
theaters.
going to the theaters
But
and
you did it. You actually
louder
went to the movie
music.
theater.
Yes, that's the stuff that I'm working on. It's just things like that now.
Yes.
But
Excellent. Excellent. And it will continue, like as far as you've come and as much as it feels like your life is back, it gets better too. Like as the more distance you get, like every time you think, "Oh wow, it can't get better than this," you'll suddenly realize, "Oh,
oh
it's better than this." So,
yeah, it's so
it's
exciting now.
You've done amazing, Doug. I was an honor to work with you. I just really wanted to get your story out there because I know so many people are struggling with really severe hyperacusis. And as hard as it is for people to find help with tinnitus, like it's even harder to find help with hyperacusis. And there aren't a ton of really powerful success stories out there. So I wanted to get your story out to the people and just so people can understand that like even in the most like severe cases when it's so bad that you're a prisoner in your house and just retreated fully into to silence, like you can completely restore your quality of life over
Absolutely.
time by working through this. All right. Well, Doug, thank you so much for doing this today. I will make sure to get this out to the people, and that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's been my pleasure working with you, my friend.